Have you got a favourite location you've gone to, or is that?
Travelling gets more difficult and more tedious, I think, the older you get. And it's all, when you're younger, it seems very glamorous and it's nice. I think in terms of the work, the Singapore and the Far East is hard to beat, just because everybody there is so optimistic and doing interesting things, and so there's a lot of innovation there at the moment in technology and in design as well, and they're so keen to learn.
Architecture is facing a moment of real change. The pressures on the profession are stacking up. Fees are under strain, procurement models are shifting risk, sustainability expectations are rising, and technology is reshaping how buildings are designed, delivered and operated. And at the same time, many architects are questioning their influence, their role, and whether the system that govern the profession are still fit for purpose. Recently, one decision brought those questions sharply into focus. My guest today chose to step away from the Architect Registration Board, sparking one of the most important debates the profession has had in years. Not just regulation, but about responsibility, relevance, and future of architecture itself. Joining me is Chris Williamson, President of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Chris is an architect with nearly 4 decades of practice, a founding partner of a globally respected studio, and a long-standing advocate for architecture's role in shaping public life. As RIBA President, he has been outspoken about the need to rethink how the profession is regulated and how architects maintain influence, and how architecture reconnects with the society it serves. In this episode, we talk openly about why he stepped away from the ARB, what he hopes that decision will change, and how architecture must evolve in a world shaped by technology, collaboration, and growing responsibility. This is a conversation about power, purpose, and the future of the profession. So Chris, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No. Well, look, Chris, I want to start off, you've spent nearly 4 decades as an architect in the architectural world, and you're now president of RIBA, and I wanted to get your perspective on how you describe the state of architecture profession today.
There's massive change. I mean, there was massive change when I qualified. I met Andrew Weston at Leicester Poly, and the profession's changed a lot since then. But the rate of change now is getting more rapid. So we drew everything. We basically had, with the first year, I think, to start learning basic computer programming. We were taught to write Fortran programs in a separate computer department. But computers in architecture in the late 70s weren't a thing. But gradually, even when we started designing the Jubilee line, that was the first project in 1990 that we were using it on. But now, so the rate of change and the amount of specialisms within architecture, and you can just foresee the way that it's going, and we need to. That's why I think we need to change our educational system and our lifelong learning to try and ensure that we can develop specialisms within the profession.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken on this podcast a few times, actually, is that number of application stack that now architects are using, the fact they're having to collaborate globally, the adoption of AI. There's a lot of different things in the changing world. I mean, from an architect perspective, I mean, how are people trying to keep up with this change?
I think I think the architecture profession should, in some ways, be more like the advertising industry, where you have different teams for different purposes. I mean, our education system over the last 50 years, probably, or longer, has tried to give a general all-round education, which is great, because if you're a one-man band in Colchester, you need to be able to do everything. But increasingly, there are more people doing specialist roles, particularly in London and globally, working on larger projects. So allowing specialisms within the training, I think, is really important. And we need to ensure that the whole of the profession is represented, which is why I wanted to do this role. I think there's a tendency for us as architects to be only focused. We're incredibly passionate about architecture. Everyone that I know is an architect, but they're passionate about their own bit of architecture, whether that's heritage or whether it's AI or whether it's sustainability or whether it's detailing. Or we need to make sure that all of those are equally well represented, and that's the way to get more influence in government, I think, is to stress our specialisms, because they think of us as all-rounders, if they think of us at all, and not really having a specialism apart from making buildings a little bit nicer. So I think it's really important that they see us as having, because we have got the most fantastic experts. We've got people that know far more about housing than most other professions, because they've been in the cutting edge of it for 30 years and they know everything about it. They know, and as an architect, you get to see what everybody else does. So I think getting that across to the New Towns Commission, to having architects involved in the national planning policy and all the other things is really important. And I think we've kind of, in a way, lost that a little bit. So I think it's important to sort of re-establish that, and pushing forward our specialists is a good way of doing that.
Well, that takes us on to, I suppose, the latest news, which obviously before Christmas you chose to not renew yourself with the ARB. What changed in you to do that? Why did you start to make that decision? And I suppose a third part is that what sort of impact did you want that to have?
It was really interesting, actually, because I had a series of things that I wanted to do. I'm a great believer in the first 100 days and trying to make an impact in the first 100 days. I think it's really important. So I wanted to try and hit the ground running. So I had a group of things that I wanted to do, and strangely, this wasn't one of them. Right, okay. But it was more about establishing which I did do, actually. I established a President's Advisory Group to invite people that aren't on council, aren't on the board, but are passionate about their own view of architecture, just to be as a President's advisor, saying, look, this is what I think we need to do. So I got people from the fields of healthcare, from the fields of management, from communications and PR, housing, the top of the profession, to look at what we need to do, because so that we didn't spend time just reacting to government initiatives, saying, what do you think about this? But actually trying to lead and say, look, this is what we should be doing. Whether it's the British Railway Bill or whatever, the reorganisation of transport or infrastructure or power or healthcare provision. So so we would lead rather than be asked to wait to be asked to respond to things. So I did that. And I did another number of other things. And I some nights I would go to bed thinking, yes, I'm making a difference. We all like to think we're making a difference. Then I thought, actually, this is going to take 2 years to do. And then it was really going to different awards ceremonies, judging the Sterling Prize, awarding the gold medal or the nomination for the gold medal to the King, and then awarding the student awards, the silver and bronze awards, and seeing these amazing students. And then one Saturday morning, handing out 300 certificates for Part 3 students. Brilliant. And their proud parents were, and trying to explain to them why they can't call themselves an architect unless they pay 225 quid to ARB. And even then, the function isn't regulated in any way. It was trying to explain to them, after all this hard work that their sons and daughters had done, I just thought, this is something I can do. I can resign from ARB and because most architects are worried that if they do it, it'll be commercially disadvantaged. So I thought it'll at least get the debate open.
Yeah.
And what I was surprised about is, because I thought, again, RIBA would say, "Oh, don't do that, don't rock the boat, no, just," but they actually were very supportive. Good. And said, actually, that seems like a good idea. It'll make a point. And before I knew it, they'd written a press release, and I couldn't back down even if I wanted to. So, because I'm not actually a very confrontational person. I like to do things collaboratively. But this has actually been going on for 20 or more years or more, and I just thought this is something that. And I obviously sounded a lot of people out and waited for somebody to say that's a stupid idea, but nobody did. But obviously, once you do it, then you do get a few people on social media saying that's a really stupid idea. But most people have thought it's positive and been very supportive.
Have you been surprised by the support I've seen it on LinkedIn and other channels. Have you been surprised by the support, or?
Yeah, I have really, because I have and I haven't. I have, but partly because most people have been really kind and said it. This is a great thing. But I wasn't really surprised because I knew that it was a concern that most people had. But obviously there's lots of people with different opinions. And I'm not at all a protectionist person. I don't think that, I wouldn't want to say architects can only do this. But I think there's a matrix of skills that we have. And sometimes it might be architects and planners that can do that bit, and it might be architects and engineers, or it might be architects and clerk of works, or construction contractors can do things, but with a matrix of what, for the interest of public safety and competence and ethics, and just making sure that we've got the right people doing the right things. You need to agree and also have it regulated what people can do. Because I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said, well, you might not be able to call yourself an architect anymore because you're paying your fee to be on the register, but you could call yourself a fire engineer or an infrastructure fire engineer. And I thought, that's crazy. That's almost more, specific.
Yeah.
But it's unregulated. So I could formulate my CV to be able to be a fire engineer on Singapore Metro or something, and it's but I can't call myself an architect. So I think it's a good time to do it as well, because the government are looking at the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it does help concentrate people's minds, I suppose.
I would say, but has it got too complex? Because I understand it protects the title of an architect, right, which is great, and that's what we discussed, but we talked about all the different things that architects right at the beginning of this is what they're involved with and the rate of change. Is it too difficult to start protecting both the architect as a title, but also its professional role?
Well, that to me, it's all bound up in the same thing. So I want to transform our lifelong learning so that you can become a specialist. So the initials RIBA are something that somebody's passionate about joining because they want to be the best of the best. So you would have different designations and different certification depending on what lifelong learning you've chosen to do. So a young architect will be able to curate their own career, so that I could study, which I have done. I did a BREEAM assessment course a year ago, and it was 120 hours lifelong learning online, but I was only needed to write down 2 hours of it in my CPD register, because there's all these other things that you have to do as well.
Sure.
But at this stage in my career, I should be able to specialise in something and then go to either a new employer or a new client and say, look, this is what I've been doing for the last year or 5 years. I'm the best in the world at this, and this is the learning that I've done. And it would help us to earn more, either from your employer saying, look, this is what I've done, rather than having just rely on the jobs that you've done, which is equally important. But it also has loads of other advantages, like women coming back from maternity leave or having a break, or having brilliant online learning anywhere in the world would help us become a global community as well. So the whole competence thing of post-Grenfell, because I actually suggested this about 10 years ago, and I thought it had been accepted as the way we were forward. And to be fair, it is being worked on. So our RIBA has got a competence matrix of what people at various stages in their career should do. But it's not right that we should expect a partner in a AJ 100 firm to do the same lifelong learning as a 30-year-old just starting out. So I think being able to tailor your career and develop expertise throughout your life, and it doesn't mean to say you have to stay with that the whole time, which is one of the great things. You can,
pivot
5 years' time, you can choose to do something else. So to me, it's one and the same, and so the specialisms. I'm always really reassured by going to see schools of architecture just how passionate and enthusiastic and energetic the students are, despite coming out with all this student debt and coming into a poorly paid profession. So it's bound up with that to try and get the profession better paid. And if somebody wants to study construction management, then rather than not being an architect, that you do that as an architect, and become a construction manager as an architect and as a member of RIBA, or community engagement or stakeholder management, to embrace those parts of the profession rather than letting them drift off and join another profession. I mean, I met one woman, brilliant woman, who's an architect at Foster's, and she's setting up a facade engineering profession. And I thought, well, we'll make that part of the RIBA, because that's an important part of architecture. Shouldn't be, always fractioning what we do. We should embrace lots of different specialisms within the profession. And it's partly our fault, because when we give awards out, we give them to the designer, the guy who does the sketch on the napkin or whatever, rather than the hundreds of people that have contributed to getting the building built.
Well, I want to talk about the role of an architect in a second, because, and then I'll come back to the student section, because I think that's a very interesting topic from the last podcast I do, which I'll discuss. But for me, the role of the architect has become blurred. I mean, you're having to work with more engineers, technologists, contractors. So how do you start defining, I suppose, or has the role of an architect become less defined in terms of the process and how we collaborate?
I think it's changed slowly, and it's changing more quickly now, probably because of technology. But I mean, we tend to think of ourselves as the master builder, the Christopher Wren, who knows everything about the building, and gradually we've lost a lot of those disciplines. We don't organise the contractor anymore often. We don't do the quantity surveying. So we're not really the master builder. But when something goes wrong, people think, oh, it was the architect's fault, but it wasn't. It's a team. It's often a team effort. And then again, that's partly our fault, because when things go right, we like to take all the credit.
Get the reward on the napkin, as you said. Yeah.
So, but I think we should acknowledge the expertise. It's a different part of the brain being a manager than it is having the ideas often, and not many people can switch from one to the other. It's not very often that people are brilliant at lots of things. They're usually brilliant at one thing because it takes a long time to be brilliant at something. So, but I think we ought to reward the people that make things happen as well as the ones that have the ideas.
Yeah, totally agree. On the student front and I suppose any architect front, is that there seems to be a shift that architects are leaving more of the profession to try and get into more the technology side, right? We had Alistair Lewis on time where people are actively asking him is, how do I get more into the technology side? And we're seeing an impact on it. Why? Because it pays more. Yeah. Two, it's a bit more, I suppose, sexy and exciting in terms of what they're developing. But, it's sort of a sad story because, as you said, if you speak to most architects, they're passionate about their job. So do you believe it's a need right now to start, like we've said, develop around these professions, developing around these training and learning to get more architect students on that way and developing the architectural industry? Or are we going to lose more architects to moving towards the tech world?
I think there are very definite people in the industry that want to do more technology, more on the computing side, more on imagery or programming, or you being at I think our profession at the moment, there are people on the cutting edge of AI and how it's going to be used, and integrating specification writing and programming, and people on the real cutting edge, and then others are hoping that it'll go away, but it won't. So I think making sure that those people are encouraged, but not losing sight of the ones that do think differently and still want to design with a pen and paper. And I think that there are roles for everybody. It's a very broad profession, and when you look at some of the best architecture that, the Sterling Prize or the Royal Gold Medal, a lot of that still comes from that hand sketch, rather than sitting down, switching on the computer and seeing, right, what's it going to give me?
Any prompts can I do? Yeah.
And so I think, to me, both are valid in the same way that they are in music or film. It's just a different way of working, and one isn't better than the other. We all have our preferences, but it's the end result that is important, not how it's created. And whether AI will, allow you to be incredibly creative, like will it produce a Radiohead, or will it produce, it will be able to sample things, but will it push the things really forward? And probably it will, but we have to be the ones that move it in that direction.
I'll be interested to hear, because we've had some people from Zaha, from Bureau Happold on here, where they very much bottom-up approach. They like all their architects to play and understand AI and test AI and see the adoption, see the change, to see if it's becomes successful. You've got other architectural firms that go from top up. This is what we're trying to achieve with AI. This is how we want to use it, and they give a certain set of tools for that. From a RIBA perspective, when students coming through and the training and what architects are, how are you guys shifting to support that as well in the changing landscape?
Well, I think I've just read Matthew Syed's new book about diversity and how important it is to listen to different voices in the room. And I think we've always, if you have too many students from one university, we need to have different people in the office. And when we were part of the European Union, having students from Spain and Italy and France was fantastic, because they all had a slightly different nuance and slightly different emphasis. And even now, most of the students are from the UK, but if they go to Bath or they go to the AA or the Bartlett or Sheffield, they have a slightly different take on things, and you need a bit of everything, really. You need people that think differently, and it's important that in a larger office you have lots of different views and different ways of working. I think it's pretty dull if everybody's churning out the same thing.
Well, it limits design process, which is what the core of it is, isn't it? So, so you leaving ARB and no longer an official architect by title. Have you got you talk about your 100-day plan in a sense, which is separate. Have you got a type of impact you wanted that to have, or is there hope from a transition with where you feel the government should change? And I get why you made the decision, why now, but why do you think the government needs to change now? Are we at a pivotal point?
Well, we were anyway, but the Grenfell disasters brought it home that and Dame Judith Hackett, one of her big takeaways for me was it's the race for the bottom, always accepting the lowest price, which is the single biggest argument for looking at how we do things safely. And I've seen that in my career. I can't remember the last time we were commissioned to do a whole project. You're commissioned to do part of it. And for something like Crossrail, Farringdon, first of all, we were working on Farringdon Station and Whitechapel Station, and we submitted everything for the parliamentary bill. Then it was re-tendered. So for one of our projects, for Crossrail, the Elizabeth Line Station at Woolwich, we had 4 separate clients. First it was Berkeley Homes, then it was Crossrail, then it was the engineer, and then it was the contractor. And we had to tender every separate contract to stay on the project. And for Whitechapel and Farringdon, which we did the parliamentary design for, which it went through approval, and then it came out of Parliament sort of 12 or 18 months later, and then it was re-tendered. We lost both of them. So there's a huge loss of knowledge, and there's no golden thread going through the whole project because somebody else has done it. And generally they've done it because they were cheaper, not because they were better. And we've been on both sides of that fence. We ended up winning Paddington Station instead of Farringdon or Whitechapel. So it's bonkers. You don't go out to buy a car or a suit or anything thinking, I'm going to buy the cheapest. I'm just going to go out and buy the cheapest I can get. You buy the best value for money. But there's so many, the procurement system seems to only work on who's the cheapest. Even if there's a technical competence threshold, it's usually outweighed by the emphasis given to the price. So I think that's a huge thing. So I think now's the time to do it, to look at the way I think it shouldn't just be about regulation. It should be about how we procure our buildings, and making sure that it's done ethically and done sensibly. You can't really leave it to the market to just choose the cheapest.
But isn't that, there's a lot of external factors, both political, government, all the things that impact the cheapest budgets, and not to mention the pressure on our industry of building faster, building cheaper, building more sustainable. Are we ever going to see that change, I guess? And how do we get towards that? Because, what I'm seeing, I suppose, globally is that we're having to build at a rate which, cheaper, quicker, in a sense. So, and cheaper's probably first, followed by quicker, which has an effect on normally pricing and things like that. So is there a way we can change that pivot? Because we're on a road where we need to build more homes. You see that in the news everywhere. You see it on every political conversation. So how do you change and pivot that?
So I think it's not like that everywhere. And I think, when you look at the best developers in London, they do things properly. and because they generally are going to hold on to the property as part of their portfolio, or they know that quality is going to sell. So I think there are certain people that, I always draw in our office a standard distribution curve and say that's where the market is. We're never going to be the most expensive. We're never going to be over here with the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis. We don't want to be over here. We want to be in that middle ground where most people want good, sensible, high quality design at a reasonable price, and that I think is where the majority of the market is. So it's a matter of making sure we have the skills to convince people, and the negotiating skills and the presentation skills to be able to get that message across, I think.
And I've had some conversations around more manufactured buildings, the kit of parts sort of methodology. How important is it that architects start adopting and applying that a little bit more? Because that seems to be a way to achieve a lot of these designs and buildings quicker, but still with the quality and the regulation that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think there's some very good work being done in modern methods of construction and prefabrication. And we built a student housing scheme, sort of 400 or 500 bedroom units in Lewisham, delivered on the back of a truck, sort of 20 or 30 a night coming down, and it's a fantastic, if it's used properly, it's a brilliant way of working, and because it maintains the quality and the speed, and you can be manufacturing the units while you're doing the site work. So there are a lot of not every, I think when it comes to delivering the 1.5 million homes, if we ever get anywhere close to that, that's going to be done by a variety of different ways, and prefabrication and modular construction is one of those. But there will be lots of other different ways of doing it as well. I'm trying to encourage more smaller scale house builders. They've all been swallowed up by the big boys that then have a sort of monopoly on. So I think there's lots of things we can do. But it's a bit of a tall order to do them within the lifetime of a parliament.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And obviously, we talked a lot around how our industry is not very. We have lack of interoperability, lack of platforms speaking to platforms from a procurement level to building level, and all that sort of stuff on previous podcasts. Which there's a lot of change to happen to enable that. I think the reason I asked that question is that. I suppose it's a hard question. Is the role of an architect, if we wanted to go down that route more and we see that as a vision, is it becoming less important?
Not at all. I don't think so. I think it's crucial. I mean, I think architecture is really important for our health, physical and mental well-being, and our spiritual well-being as well. And I think we've got to convince the politicians more that by spending a little bit more on design and placemaking and our environment, that you save money. I mean, people's mental and physical health is so tied up with their environment, both how they live at home, but also the transport. You can see the effect that decent transport systems like the Jubilee line or the Elizabeth line has to people's daily lives. And I think I think London has led the world a lot in making the city a more pleasant place to be. And when with the technology and the demands on people and the thinking time that they have, it's really important to be able to take time out and enjoy where you work. So I think that if we don't do it, if we don't look after our built environment and our natural environment, then we will be spending more on healthcare. So I think but we're not very good at putting that argument across. I mean, there's some amazing research which proves that, but the Treasury are the ones that make those decisions. They know how much to spend, and they need to be convinced.
Do you think there's a disconnect there with the government? Because, I'm very lucky I get to speak to a lot of great people, and, Andrew Victory is really one I spoke to around smarter cities and some of the things they're doing around exactly what he said around how to improve lifestyles, transport, so all the different things that are required to build a city. But the impact it has on things like healthcare and things like that. So is there a massive disconnect that the government don't understand that, that's sort of a part of what architects are doing now, as part of that role that we've been discussing?
I think, since I've been in this role, I've begun to realise that how difficult it is to get the message across to decision makers. It's almost so, because it's not talked about by the voters, it's not talked about by them. Sure. Because they don't, they're only reacting to how they're going to win the next election or their next surgery in their Friday afternoon in Market Harbour or wherever. Their concerns are cost of living, whether people have got any money, the economy, the buses running on time, and those things. The quality of the built environment isn't, unfortunately, high on their list of priorities. We've got to get it up there.
Both are linked.
And I think we can do that, but we need to show it. We need to show them examples, often in the UK where we've done it well, but if we can't, then abroad. Why you need city architects, why you need city champions, why you need design review panels as well as planning committees. Why it's important, why it makes a difference. And they're not stupid. They know that if it's good, they'll do it, if they think this is going to be important. But I think, we need to start banging the drum more about the built environment and the importance of it, rather than having it all about refugees or whatever. That it's, what dominates the news isn't the important thing to me as an architect anyway.
Totally agree. So you may be able to answer this question, but to put you on the spot. So you pay your 250 quid again to ARB and you now become an architect. How would you like that now to be governed?
I'd like to see it. I'd like to see that people, the functions that an architect does regulated more, and not in a protectionist way, but just making sure that the right people are doing the right thing. But I'd also like to see it. Being able to call yourself an architect has no relevance whatsoever unless it's a dinner party and somebody asks you what you do. And that's bonkers. It should stand for something. Sure. But I think it's partly our own fault that we don't. We can't seem to get the message across about everything that an architect does. But it's quite easy to rectify just by getting the right people in front of the politicians and the decision makers. But no, before I can get reinstated on the register, I need to pay. I think they told me I need to pay a back fee or an administration fee. But I won't rejoin until the function is regulated. And the people have said quite nasty things on social media, say it's okay for him, but it does actually make a difference. And I'm quite sad at not being able to, when I've spent since I was 18, it's the only thing that I've really wanted to do, and now I can't call myself an architect. And also I'm doing a competition at the moment, and I won't be able to enter it on my own because I'm not a registered architect. So I've got to find somebody else that'll put their name to it, and that's really sad. It's bonkers because I've done it. I've done the design. I've done all the work, and I can't enter it. And that's so it does make a difference to me. It's not just an empty gesture. But I do feel like I can do it without any sort of commercial disadvantage. Because other people can't.
And has it created the conversations you wanted to do by not renewing.
It has, yeah, it has. It really has. So I've already had meetings with the government and with other organisations, other
Brilliant.
professions, and I think it would have just ticked on for months and months with no degree of urgency. So sometimes you need to do something bold, just to push things along.
Takes one person to inflict change is a great statement I've always lived by as well. I mean, it's really hard though. So because how do we see it? Is it going to? You can't just be an architect. It's going to be specific division. Same as a doctor, right? You're not just a doctor. You might specialise in cancer. You might specialise in spine, leg surgery. There's loads of different definitions are associated to that. Are you taking some inspiration from a different type of industry, the way you like it structured?
I think the medical industry is a good example. That I think we are still going to need general practitioners, people that you go and consult, and if you're working in a small town as a one-man band as an architect or a small practice, you need to have a range of skills as you do as a general practitioner. But if somebody wants something specific, I mean, the air conditioning, modern offices, modern hospitals or housing, if you're doing more than a simple building, the amount of knowledge that you need is getting more and more complex to do the whole design and integrate everything, particularly if you're going to be the golden thread running throughout the whole project. You need to know what everybody is doing, and that you need to know that they're doing it competently. So I think just as you do in medicine, specialise in a particular field, because it gets more and more complicated the more specialist you get. That's a good analogy for the profession that I see as architecture. But everybody would still register with the BMA because you need to know that they're competent. So everybody would still want to be associated with RIBA because of the brand that it is, that it produces. The reason I joined when I was a student is because it had all the best lectures, all the best talks, events, competitions. It was a brand that you wanted to be associated with it. It's not something you join reluctantly. And if we get it right, then our members become our biggest advocates. Strangely, having worked abroad, the profession is seen so much more favourably abroad than it is at home often.
Oh, really?
British architects are incredibly well respected abroad, and you're treated like royalty when you go abroad, in a way that you're not when you're at home.
There's many British architects now looking at places to live abroad. So,
and working. I mean, we're lucky that we're as a British architect, you're sort of pushing at an open door to some extent, because people like Foster's and Rogers have made that happen, and even before them, the Victorian architects were working abroad, and we're people still look to us for our creativity and our ability to get things done. So it's still an incredibly exciting time to be an architect, and I want it to. I mean, the reason I wanted to do this was RIBA has been incredibly good to me throughout my career, both of getting started and then introducing us to new markets, whether that's trade delegations abroad, or just giving us the opportunity to be put on a shortlist for competitions. And even if we didn't win them, at least we thought we were getting somewhere. And you could see that this is a profession that you could actually go somewhere in. So I think I want to do that now for young architects, because I look at them coming out of university and thinking they're far better than I was when I was that age, but they're not getting the same opportunities. And they should do, and they deserve. I had a free architectural education, and these guys are coming out of university with huge debts, and I think RIBA needs to be there to help them as much as possible.
Totally understand. Look, I think you've given us some really good insight to why you made the decision, where you would like to see it go, and for those who have been horrible on social media, I don't think they understand your passion behind this and the passion behind the decision. That's been really felt today, which has been great. So thank you for the insights. I've got, I suppose, one last question as we wrap up. So looking ahead, which is always how I end this, is what does success look like to you? And what I mean by that is not just in terms of regulation, but in terms of restoring the architecture's clarity on their role. Or people's clarity of an architecture role. It'd be really good to hear your view on that as we end the podcast, but also how do we also get clarity on an architect's influence and value to society?
Just before Christmas, I was on a British Council delegation to Qatar, and with all the other creative industries. So there's film, fashion, music, art, and gaming, strangely, was the one that everybody drew the most attention, because that seems to be one of the biggest economic drivers at the moment. But architecture is so important to our creative industries in the UK, because it's incredibly visible, and it has the construction industry behind it. So not just the design of buildings, but so the New London Architecture, the NLA, did a report recently about how if you analyse the whole of the building, the built environment, it dwarfs the financial industries sector. And you look how influential the financial industries sector is in government policy, and this particularly in the city. But we tend to ally ourselves with the construction industry, which stops at when the building's built. But if you looked at the building owners and the renters and the householders as well, the amount of money in the economy with the built environment dwarfs the financial services industry. So I think getting that again in front of the government and looking at how we can utilise that at home and abroad to get more people really focused on what makes the built environment. So people are interested. I mean, I've just recently bought an old church, a derelict church in my hometown between Nottingham and Derby, and converted it into a community arts centre, and everybody's interested in the arts and in architecture. So I've got a relationship with the local universities, De Montfort and Trent and Derby, and people are passionate about their own built environment. But we need to sort of nurture that and make sure that the politicians know that they're interested in it as well. So I think what I would love to do is to, and I know I'm not going to do it in 2 years, but hopefully inspire somebody else to do the same after me. And it's a continual process, is get architecture in the built environment, because a lot of the things that our challenges are global challenges, and countries and cities around the world have the same issues, and RIBA can help work in association with other institutes to make sure that we tackle those things together, and really make sure that the built environment is part of our, I'd love to see it part of the school curriculum, and people looking at how we design our places, because when I was a kid, nobody suggested architecture as a career to me.
Same.
I picked up a book on architecture and said to my careers officer, this seems to be everything that I want to do. And I was basically told, it's not for the likes of you, sort of thing, because it's like it's a profession, and you go and study art or something, but or go and work for a management training program or something. But I think we need to open up, and again, going back to lifelong learning, I think taking that into the universities to be able to specialise when you're at university, you would get more diversity of people studying architecture, and we have so many kids from Southwark and Tower Hamlets coming into our office and looking at the models and looking at everything that we do and think, why has nobody suggested this to me? Because I could do this. But it is sort of seen as, it's a sad indictment that even now, after all this time, only 15% of architecture students are from a non-professional background, and that's shocking, really.
Yeah.
I would have thought, because we took part in a survey with the London School of Economics, and I thought, we are going to be much more than that. We'll buck the trend, but we weren't. We were exactly, because you can't, when you interview somebody, you have no idea what their social background is. And you probably shouldn't be interested anyway, but it is amazing that, that we're ruling out a whole cohort of good designers because they don't know about architecture and they don't know it's accessible to them. So that's where I would like to get to.
Brilliant. No, really good. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. Cover some good topics. And look, if anyone wants to reach out to discuss more about the decision of making it, I think it's good to keep eyes on yourself as we see this development and the conversations continue with the government. And as well as, I think as people invest and look more into RIBA, I think it can support a lot of that growth for a lot of people. But just wanted to say thank you for your time and enjoyed having you on the podcast.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
This conversation goes far beyond one decision or one institution. What we've explored today is a much bigger question about architecture itself, how it defines its role, how it earns trust, how it leads in the industry that is becoming more complex, more collaborative, and more accountable. Whether you agree with Chris's stance or not, it's clear that architecture cannot stand still. The challenges around influence, responsibility, regulation, and relevance aren't going away, and avoiding them only weakens the profession further. If this episode has done anything, I hope it encourages deeper reflection, not just on how architecture is governed, but on how architects show up, lead, and create value in the world today. My thanks to Chris for an open and thoughtful conversation. This is the AEC Innovators Circle Podcast, where we explore the ideas, decisions, and leadership shaping the future of the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. If you found value in this episode, follow the podcast, share with your network, and join us for the next conversation. See you next time.